Through any of this, nobody's family.
Everywhere we go, she was.
An impending criminal investigation. I will not make any further comments today, except for.
Dallas, Texas, an April afternoon in 2019. The atmosphere was as slow as usual. But in a parking lot of an apartment complex near the city center, a crowd gathered around a tent scene. A video was recorded on a phone, then went viral on social media. In the video, a young girl stood in the middle of the siege, her eyes panicked, trying to stay calm, looking for a way out in vain. The person in the video is Malaysia Booker, 22 years old, a transgender woman of color. The incident happened after a minor collision between her car and a stranger, but the situation quickly spiraled out of control. What is worth mentioning? No one helped. No one spoke up. A few days later, Malaysia appeared at a community meeting. Her face was still marked by the incident, but her voice was still gentle, her eyes still full of gratitude. She said she was lucky to be alive.
Myself, the transgender community, and also the city of Dallas. But I want to sincerely thank all you guys for coming out, by your support and fairness. And just as I'm overwhelmed by your presence, your donation to support of my transgender family and allies.
The city seemed to have closed a painful chapter, but that was only the beginning. Something unusual was happening quietly behind the lights. A series of events, quiet but full of connections, unanswered questions. And then, just a few weeks later, everything took an unexpected turn. After the April 2019 parking lot incident, Malaysia Booker became the focus of many discussions about human rights and safety for the transgender community. In public, she maintained a gentle smile, but friends said Booker began to be more cautious in her movements and interactions. On May 17, 2019, just one day before the incident, she appeared on social media via a short live stream, chatting with friends and sharing plans to attend a small gathering in the South Dallas area, where she had been close. That night, Malaysia left her home around 9 p.m. Some sources say she took a taxi or was picked up by someone, but there is no concrete confirmation from traffic cameras or eyewitnesses. What is clear is that she has had no contact with her family or friends since that time. Attended a small gathering in the South Dallas area where she had been close. At approximately 1 a.m. on May 18, a woman was seen leaving a dark-colored sedan near the intersection of Garden View and Tennyson Park. The vehicle was then recorded leaving in an eastbound direction, but no traffic cameras captured the license plate number. Witnesses described the woman as appearing to be alone, in a hurry but not panicking. For the next 5 hours, from 1 a.m. to approximately 6 a.m., there were no reports of unusual activity in the area. The weather was mild, the streets were empty, and no major activity was reported around Garden View, which is a quiet area at night, mostly residential and small parks. Gathering in the South Dallas area where she had been close. Around the same time, several residents in the area reported hearing unusual noises in the early hours of the morning, but no one was clear about when or what they were hearing. One person who lives nearby said they felt something strange in the air around 5:45 a.m. when they went out to get the paper but didn't think much of it until the police showed up a few hours later. Remarkably, there was no sign that Malaysia had been followed or threatened before her disappearance. Friends and relatives also did not notice anything unusual on the 17th. It was this calmness that made the subsequent developments even more difficult to explain. She did not have any conflicts, did not call for help, nor did she fall into a clearly dangerous situation. While many cases often have a chain of events leading to a climax, Malaysia's story is like a film missing important frames, leaving gaps in time and a series of unanswered hypotheses. Early on the morning of May 18, 2019, the air near the intersection of Garden View and Tennyson Park in East Dallas was still damp from the night's dew. This is a quiet residential area, surrounded by small streets and nearby parks, and there is usually little movement in the early morning hours. At around 6:40 a.m., a local resident, a middle-aged woman who was out for her usual exercise walk, suddenly noticed something unusual on a deserted stretch of road behind a row of low trees. Hidden around a slight bend, she noticed a person lying motionless on the side of the road, his body leaning toward the white painted line. At first, the woman thought it might be someone sleeping or having a health problem. However, as she got closer, she immediately realized the situation was much more serious. Feeling the tension radiating from the surroundings, she immediately grabbed her phone and called 911 at 6:44 a.m. Less than 10 minutes later, Dallas police arrived, cordoned off the area and let paramedics in. Before them was a young woman lying on her side, fully clothed, with no signs of struggle or personal effects around her. She was quickly pronounced dead at the scene. As police secured the scene, people began to gather from a distance, watching curiously, but no one had yet identified the victim. After completing the initial identification steps, the police entered the image and personal characteristics into the system for comparison. By noon that same day, the identity was confirmed. It was Malaysia Booker, who had become widely known after the incident in April. The information spread very quickly, even before the press had time to publish it. In the LGBTQ+ community in Dallas, emotions were mixed with shock and fear. On social media, many immediately questioned whether this incident was related to the story that had caused a stir just a few weeks ago. Recognizing the sensitivity of the situation, the Dallas police chief called an emergency meeting with the homicide squad. The issue was not only the high profile of the victim, but also the ambiguity of the circumstances. A young woman, known to the public, was found alone in a remote location with no signs of suspicious activity around her. The first question listed in the file was, why was Malaysia Booker here at that time alone? At 9:15 a.m., the body was transferred to the Dallas Medical Examiner's office for a detailed autopsy. A preliminary autopsy report released 48 hours later estimated the time of death to be between 4:30 and 5:30 a.m. The same day, just 1 to 2 hours before the discovery. The body carried no identification, but fingerprints quickly confirmed the victim's identity. One detail in particular caught the investigators' attention. Fingernails and some small fibers found near the scene did not match the victim's. These samples were immediately sealed for DNA analysis and fabric testing, opening up new avenues for the hypothesis that a second person may have been present nearby. While there were no obvious signs of a struggle at the scene, the absence of personal evidence and the close proximity of the death to daylight complicated the case and set off a months-long investigation. From the moment the victim's identity was confirmed, the investigation began quietly but urgently. Malaysia Booker, a transgender woman who had been known after a media-driven incident, was no longer there, and the silence surrounding where she was found added to the mystery. On the morning of May 19, 2019, investigators officially opened a case, starting from the quiet crime scene where there were few clues, then turning to where she had last been seen the night before. A key starting point was the victim's phone. It was not at the scene but was still pinging after the moment of death. Carrier data showed that Malaysia's device was traveling with another phone before it lost connection. When the GPS was checked, one name kept coming up: Kendra Lyles. Lyles, 33, had no prior criminal record, but he had a history of operating in the area where unsolved crimes had occurred. When investigators reviewed traffic cameras and vehicle logs from the night of May 17, they found a light-colored Lincoln at Spring and Lagao, the last location Booker had been seen. The model of the car matched a car owned by a family member of Lyles, and that solidified the case. In late May, police brought Lyles in for questioning. He claimed to be home and that he did not know Booker, but phone records quickly disproved him. Lyles's device had left the house at 10 p.m., following a route that matched the victim's phone. When confronted, he changed his story, saying he had just seen it but did not know the name. The conflict became clear. An acquaintance of Mulesia's, who is not being named for safety reasons, then provided a crucial piece of information. Lyles had been around the local transgender community, known for brief encounters, and then disappearing. This information opened up a new avenue of investigation. Police went back to the unsolved murders of May and found that at least 2 of them, one on McCallum BLVD on May 22 and another on Coit Road on May 23, had similar characteristics. The vehicle involved in each case was described as a light-colored Lincoln. During the investigation, investigators discovered something else of interest. The last signal from Mulesia's phone was recorded at around 2 a.m. on May 18, in the same area where the body was found hours later. At about the same time, Lyles's device was confirmed to have left the scene and traveled in the opposite direction. The route was recorded almost minute by minute, and it paints a clearer picture than any testimony. Not stopping at data, witnesses around Garden View also added important observations. One resident said he saw a strange car stop on a deserted road at dawn, but leave shortly after. There was no noise, no argument, just an inexplicable appearance during a time when almost no one was around. As they pieced together the pieces of the investigation from phone data, traffic cameras, conflicting statements, and witness accounts, the picture began to emerge. To strengthen their case, the police brought in behavioral experts. They noted that Lyles frequently changed his tone of voice and at times lost control of his emotions when asked about his route on the night of May 17. Not only were there inconsistencies in his words, but there were also breaks in his narrative logic, a typical sign of someone trying to create a fake story. On June 12, 2019, with sufficient legal and technical evidence, an official arrest warrant was signed. Kendra Lyles was arrested on charges of involvement in 3 murders, including that of Mulesia Booker. Police searched his residence, vehicle, and phone. Several samples of fabric and items of unknown origin were seized for further analysis, adding to the increasingly dense file. However, from the moment of his arrest, Lyles refused to cooperate, remaining silent during subsequent interrogations. However, the investigation process did not depend on confessions but was reinforced by solid technical evidence. In an internal meeting in late June, the chief investigator commented, "We don't need him to talk. Everything is told through data travel, and it is the gaps that he cannot fill." As time passed, the case file gradually became complete. A case with no witnesses, no crime scene cameras, no confessions, but solved by technology, by patience, and by numbers that don't lie. On November 6, 2023, the criminal trial began with a heavy atmosphere, not with a formal verdict, but with a tension-filled emotional charge. Kendra Lavar Lyles, 37, entered the courtroom with a rare decision. He pleaded guilty to murder just as jury selection began. That moment turned the trial from a potential legal argument into a surprise denouement, forcing prosecutors and the victim's family straight into the most heartbreaking part of the proceedings: victim impact statements. A day later, on November 9, 4 of Mulesia Booker's relatives and friends were called to the stand. Each spoke with a voice, from the depths of their grief to the silent protest of those who had caused the trauma. Shocking. Mulesia's mother, Stephanie Houston, holding a photo of her daughter, told Lyles, "You broke me. You caused so much pain to my family."
Damn you! Nothing but hell and death is gonna come to you.
Each word felt like a spark of fire in the courtroom. Mulesia's sister then spoke up forcefully. "Why did you do this?" Only to receive a blank stare from the defendant. She concluded with a furious sentence, "I hope your time in prison is a living hell." Throughout the testimony, the atmosphere became increasingly tense, as if to demonstrate the power of pain to translate into words and the most silent accusation. A close friend of Mulesia then placed her portrait on the table, saying, "Mulesia is a flame. She was not extinguished but became a monument. And her final words were like a challenge: trans lives matter. The rhetoric didn't stop at the law office. The LGBTQ plus community in Dallas, who participated in, witnessed, and spoke out after the April assault, spoke out. "We hope this sent a strong message that transgender lives matter," said Ahmed Gori, president of her eponymous foundation. "More than just a case, it has become a symbol through its telling." Tori Cooper of the Human Rights Campaign notes, "Since 2013, hundreds of trans women, mostly women of color, have been murdered, and Malaysia is one of them." She says Malaysia's story should serve as a wake-up call to those who believe that violence against this community is an isolated incident. Though the motive was not disclosed, the court traditionalized the sentence, and the public found justice, albeit belatedly. The 48 years in prison Lyles will spend reflecting on her responsibilities to the law and society were the result of a plea deal, but also an indelible reminder. There's no time to bring Malaysia back, but at least justice has been served, as her mother put it. In the fall of 2023, the trial concluded, and Dallas was no longer a city of questions. But what remained was not just a verdict, but the void Malaysia Booker left behind, quiet but persistent, etched in the memories of her family, friends, and even those who had only seen her in her spirited public appearances. Malaysia's death is not just the loss of a young person. It is also a sign that, even in an age where voices are increasingly calling for equality, there are still gray areas where discrimination, misunderstanding, and silence can take the lives of those who are truly themselves. Looking back at this case, one cannot help but think of the warnings that have been issued about the need for the legal system to act more decisively, about the need for society to understand and protect more, especially vulnerable groups. And although justice has spoken after 4 long years, the question remains: if the community had been protected in time, if the concern had not stopped at the viral video, would the outcome have been different? The Malaysia Booker case is closed on paper, but the echoes remain. It reminds us to think about how we view differences and the responsibility to protect all citizens, regardless of skin color, gender, or identity. Ultimately, justice is not just a verdict in a court of law, but a journey that the whole community must build together. And then, a quiet question arises: how many more stories like this must happen before equality is no longer something to fight for? What do you think is the scariest thing about this case? Leave a comment below. One June afternoon in 2020, the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia was a peaceful place, with boats drifting by and the wind rustling through the trees. But the calm was quickly shattered by an urgent 911 call. The caller reported that, beneath the murky water, something had washed up on the shore. From a distance, it didn't look like a log or a piece of trash. The shape clearly suggested the silhouette of a human body. In an instant, both the rescue team and the local police were dispatched to the scene. The sound of sirens blared, tearing apart the summer afternoon. The appearance of fire trucks, police cars, and officers in special uniforms turned this normally quiet area into a center of curiosity for passers-by. Few people expected that before this incident, Dominique Rimai Fells, or often called by her friends by the intimate name Rimai, was still a young woman with a life full of aspirations. She loved art, often painted, wrote poetry, and did not hesitate to express her personality. Rimai walked into a room with a bright smile, leaving behind a feeling of warmth and closeness. Yet that afternoon, as the sun dyed the Schuylkill River a golden yellow, the unusual sighting sowed an unsettling feeling in everyone's hearts. Who was the first to notice and call 911? What exactly happened before the body washed ashore, quietly in the water that was so familiar to the city's residents? These questions will remain unanswered throughout the investigation. No one knew that this would be the beginning of one of the most shocking cases in Philadelphia in 2020. On the afternoon of June 5, 2020, the final hours of Dominique Remai-Fell's life were reconstructed through surveillance camera footage and scattered accounts from residents around the apartment complex. That afternoon, Dominique appeared at the apartment of Akhenaton Jones, a man little known in the community, living a reclusive life, but later became the central figure in the case. The hallway camera shows Dominique entering the apartment complex with a normal appearance, showing no signs of anxiety or alertness. She walked naturally, as if this was not her first time here. By early evening, some of the residents on the same floor had heard faint sounds of arguing coming from the Jones apartment. The noises grew louder, then quieter, then died away as if something had been deliberately silenced. Yet no one approached, nor did anyone call the police, as everyone assumed it was just a passing personal dispute. After that moment, Dominique was never seen again. There were no images of her leaving the apartment, no traces in the hallway, no swipe of her access card. Social media, where Dominique regularly updates her status, is also completely silent. Friends have not received any messages or calls. Family has no sign that Dominique is safe. The sudden silence, in the context of her having just entered Jones' apartment, makes the void even more terrifying. Night has fallen. The lights from the apartment are still shining as usual, but behind the closed door is a story that no one knows clearly. There are no eyewitnesses, no explanation. And from the next morning, all that remained was the complete disappearance of Dominique, an unannounced disappearance, leaving friends, family, and the entire community tormented with the question: what really happened inside those four walls, and why did no one intervene before it was too late? On the afternoon of June 8, 2020, the usual tranquility of the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia was suddenly shattered by a horrifying discovery. A group of people walking along the riverside trail suddenly noticed a strange object stuck in the floating debris. At first, they thought it was just a large piece of wood or trash that had been washed up. But as they got closer, the outline became clearer. It was a human body. The sight left everyone speechless. One of them immediately called 911 in a panic. Minutes later, the sirens of police cars and ambulances echoed throughout the quiet area. Authorities quickly arrived, cordoned off the riverside area, and deployed a water rescue team to bring the body to shore. When the body was recovered, silence reigned. The condition of the body and the unusual signs made the police immediately realize that this could not be a drowning incident. There were no identification documents or personal belongings, but the body's distinctive features and body shape quickly suggested an identity. Within hours, the news spread throughout the local community. The identity was confirmed as Dominique Remai-Fell's, the young woman who had been missing since the evening of June 5. For family and friends, the news was a shock that shattered the fragile hope that Dominique had simply gone off somewhere without a chance to contact her. The unanswered messages and unanswered phone calls were now the harsh reality. She was gone. On the banks of the Schuylkill River, a place that had been synonymous with the city's tranquility, the local community was in shock. The loss immediately raised a series of questions. What had really happened in the 3 days Dominique had been missing, and who was responsible for her departure? As soon as the body was recovered on the afternoon of June 8, 2020, field technicians cordoned off the riverside area and began the process of collecting evidence. The debris and moss covering the water made identification difficult, but the shape of the body and its external condition soon suggested that it could not have been a natural death. Dominique's body was quickly taken to the Philadelphia City Medical Examiner's office, where doctors determined that the body had been in the water for approximately 3 days, which coincided with the time she disappeared. Although the river environment washed away many traces, experts still noted a series of serious injuries. Severe trauma to the head and body, along with obvious injuries from a violent collision. This evidence completely ruled out the possibility of ordinary drowning. The forensic report indicated that the cause of death was blunt force trauma before the body was thrown into the river. More importantly, the results of the soft tissue analysis and the condition of the body allowed for an estimated time of death to fall on the evening of June 5, 2020, the exact moment when Dominique was last seen on camera entering Akhenaton Jones' apartment, and then not seen again. In parallel with the autopsy, investigators expanded their search warrant to Jones' apartment. Upon entering, forensic officers noticed several unusual features: scrubbing marks on the floor but still showing small traces of blood, faint traces of cleaning solution on the walls, and several areas of disarray that were different from the usual living arrangements. In one corner of the room, shoe prints on the floor were determined to be the right size for Jones. In particular, in the living room, the police seized a large knife with a suspicious stain on the blade. Next to it, many objects were displaced. The tables and chairs were not in the right place, as if there had been a fierce struggle. All these details, when compared with the forensic results, gradually fit into a picture. Jones' apartment was the scene of the murder, and from here, the investigation focused entirely on this mysterious man. Once the forensic report determined that the case was a homicide, the entire attention of the investigating agency turned to Akhenaton Jones. His sudden disappearance could not be considered a coincidence. The time when Dominique stopped communicating was also the time when Jones left his apartment. That apartment, the last place where Dominique was recorded on camera, was now abandoned. The doors were locked, the belongings were intact, but the owner was nowhere to be found. The personal phone was disconnected. The private car had disappeared from the familiar parking lot. Everything had the characteristics of a calculated escape. Investigators began to reconstruct Jones's journey. Carrier data showed that his phone had been pinging as he left Philadelphia, headed south, and then went completely silent. Traffic cameras and surveillance systems at several rest stops also helped reconstruct Jones's route, confirming that this was a getaway rather than a random departure. In the abandoned apartment, forensics found important evidence. Blood stains had seeped deep into the floor and were difficult to clean. DNA tests showed Dominique's DNA at multiple locations. In the closet, a pair of blood-stained shoes had been hastily hidden, apparently not in time to be disposed of. All of this reinforced the theory that the apartment was the scene of the crime. To better understand Akhenaton Jones, police interviewed friends and acquaintances. They described Jones as having a history of frequent outbursts and displaying aggressive behavior in personal relationships, but never before facing trial. These details were not enough to convict, but when put into context, they added up to a portrait of a dangerous suspect. With the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place, authorities took the decisive step, issuing a nationwide arrest warrant for Akhenaton Jones. His name and photo were widely publicized in the media, along with a call for anyone with information to contact the police immediately. The manhunt lasted for months, crossing state borders, until Jones was discovered in Los Angeles. On November 13, 2020, the police successfully arrested Dominique Rimay-Fells, ending his journey of hiding. This event not only ended a long manhunt, but also marked an important turning point. From now on, the suspect officially had to face the legal system, and the path to justice for Dominique Rimay-Fells began to become clearer than ever. The trial of Akhenaton Jones took place in Philadelphia and quickly attracted widespread attention. The courtroom was packed with press, community representatives, and people who knew Dominique. The atmosphere was tense as each side tried to make their final arguments in the sensational case. Prosecutors presented a carefully prepared investigative dossier. Traces of Dominique's DNA in the apartment, bloody shoes hastily hidden in a closet, a crime scene with unusual cleaning details, and most importantly, Jones's months-long escape. They asserted, if this was just an accident, why would the suspect disappear, leave everything behind, and move across several states to hide? The defense attorneys tried to counterattack, suggesting that a spontaneous conflict had spiraled out of control, leading to an unintended tragedy. However, this defense was quickly refuted by forensic experts. The autopsy report made it clear that Dominique's injuries were not consistent with an accident, but rather showed intentional violence. The arguments were lengthy, and every little detail was dissected before the jury. Finally, the picture became clear. Akhenaton Jones was not only responsible for Dominique's death, but had intentionally concealed it and then fled Philadelphia. In 2022, the court handed down the verdict: first-degree murder, life without parole. The sentence was considered severe, fully reflecting the nature of the case and the dangerousness of the defendant. The response from the LGBTQ+ community has been overwhelming. Human rights organizations and transgender advocacy groups have spoken out in the immediate aftermath of the verdict, seeing it as not only justice for Dominique Rimai Fells, but also an affirmation that the lives of transgender women of color deserve to be protected. On the streets of Philadelphia, vigils, rainbow flags, and chants for justice have turned the verdict into a symbolic moment, both a closure to the case and a wake-up call for society. Dominique Rimai Fells ended her life journey at the age of 27, an age when she should have been passionately pursuing art, finding simple joys and shaping a long future ahead. That departure was not only a personal loss for her family and friends, but also became a heavy silence for the community, especially transgender women of color, who always face many risks in society. The case ended with a harsh sentence for the perpetrator, but behind the courtroom doors, its echoes still resonate into larger questions. Have we truly created a safe and fair society for all? How many more tragedies could have been prevented if compassion and protection had been more present? Dominique's story is not only a reminder of a heartbreaking murder, but also a reflection on the injustices that the vulnerable community is suffering. And the final message left behind lies not only in the sentence, but in the actions of each person. Justice is not only built by the law, but also by empathy, respect, and humane choices in daily life. That is the real foundation so that tragedies like Dominique's will not happen again. Do you think justice and safety in the community are enough, or do we need more severe sentences? Share your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread awareness and justice.
We've been writing letters to each other, and in the letters you wrote, "I'm attracted to females and females only."
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Like someone as yourself. You're female. You're very attractive.
Thank you. I don't think we need to get into that. Why is it important for you that you tell this version of events?
Because that's what actually happened that night.
The testimony begins not with forensic details, not with the crime scene, but with a gentle, vague statement as if recalling a past relationship. Harlem, August 2013. The late summer air still lingers on the bustling streets. People are out on the streets. Music blares from apartment windows, cars drive by, people laugh and talk. A night like any other. But that night, a girl named Islyn Nettles walked out of her house like any other and never came back. Islyn was 21, true to herself, passionate about fashion, loving beauty, and once dreamed of starting her own brand. She was a girl, a friend, a part of a community she was trying to belong to. But what really happened that night? Why did a moment on the street change everything? On the other side of the conversation, a young man was telling the story not in panic, but in broken sentences, mixed with confusion and evasion. Maybe he was just trying to make sense of something he couldn't face. But for Islyn, and for those who have overcome fear to live, it was no longer a conversation. That's where all the questions began. On the evening of August 17, 2013, in the Harlem area in northern Manhattan, New York, the atmosphere was still bustling as usual. Around midnight, a group of 3 young women were walking along Frederick Douglass Avenue, near the corner of 148th Street. Among them was Islin Nettles, 21, a former fashion designer who lived nearby with his mother and younger brother. At the same time, a group of young men were standing and chatting near Jackie Robinson Park, just around the corner. Among the group was James Dixon, 20, a resident of Harlem who would later be identified as being directly involved in the incident. The moment the two groups met was completely coincidental. According to Dixon's later testimony, he and his friends were trying to strike up a conversation and laugh with Islin's group of friends. Neither side had any previous conflicts, nor did they know each other. Public space, late summer night, the crowd gradually thinned out. Only a few scattered groups remained nearby. From the published data, it can be determined that a short exchange took place between some people in the two groups. During that process, according to what Dixon later admitted, he had a conversation with Islin without knowing much about her. The atmosphere initially seemed comfortable, but quickly turned tense when some gossip from Dixon's friends appeared. This was an unexpected turn of events that night. The specific time of the incident was recorded as around 11:45 p.m., according to estimates from the investigation records. At this point, both Islin's group of friends and those standing nearby became direct witnesses to the chain of events that followed. The incident happened quite quickly, but not without witnesses. Some people in the area heard the commotion and stepped closer to observe. However, since this was a densely populated residential area, at night, no one thought it would be a serious incident. It is worth noting that the public surveillance camera in the area where the incident occurred was broken at the time, making the investigation difficult later. However, some witnesses in Islin's group of friends provided valuable information about the situation before the incident happened. There was no sign that Islin or her friends knew in advance or realized any danger. It all happened on a seemingly normal evening, without any forecast, without any warning. Just a summer night, a familiar street corner where people still meet, laugh, and then go home. But this time, things did not end like that. The incident occurred at approximately 11:45 p.m. on August 17, 2013, at the intersection of Frederick Douglass Avenue and 148th Street in Harlem, New York. As the incident ended in a split second, the atmosphere at the scene quickly changed. The initial sounds of laughter and scattered conversations from a few groups of people suddenly became silent. An eerie void enveloped the neighborhood as if time had stopped for a moment. The first to react was one of Islin Nettles' friends. She immediately realized that something was wrong. At that moment, there was no mistake. Her first reflex was to call her friend's name, then seek help from those around her. In the slight chaos, a few people began to approach, including those who were not involved in the previous two groups. A call to 911 was made just a few minutes later. Although the details have never been made public, records show that this call was crucial in getting emergency responders to the scene. The estimated time of the call was between 11:50 and 11:52 p.m., just minutes after the incident. The local police and paramedics arrived within 5 to 7 minutes. This is a densely populated area, so law enforcement officers frequently patrol the area. When they arrived, they were directed by people standing around the scene. One of the paramedics went first to assess the victim's initial condition, while the police officers cordoned off the area, maintained order, and questioned those present. Islin Nettles was still at the scene. She was not lost, nor did she move from her position. Everything remained as it was until the ambulance crew arrived and performed the necessary first aid. There was no recording equipment in the immediate area, as public cameras were reported to be inoperative, so eyewitness accounts became the most important source of information for reconstructing the initial events. The police presence also meant that information began to trickle into the reporting system. The atmosphere around the scene was described as noticeably subdued, with many locals watching from a distance, not fully understanding what was happening at the time. Some began whispering, Others remained silent. The arrival of police cars and ambulances brought an abrupt halt to the otherwise noisy Harlem summer night. And while no one knew the full extent of the incident, one thing was becoming clear. This was no isolated incident. Something much bigger had happened and would continue for days to come. In the early morning hours of August 18, 2013, the intersection of Frederick Douglass Boulevard and 148th Street, where the incident occurred the night before, was still cordoned off by police. The scene had been left untouched since the first responders arrived at around midnight, allowing for an investigation. However, a major obstacle quickly emerged. The public security camera system in the area was not operational at the time of the incident. This meant that there was no live video recording of the entire incident. For the police, this was a serious shortcoming, as the area was frequently visited by people, and the lack of visual material forced them to rely entirely on witness accounts and physical evidence. The scene left few traces that could be collected. This was a normal street, not in an isolated area or with many hidden spots. According to the report, several personal items identified as belonging to the victim were recovered for forensic examination. There were no signs of major disturbances in the immediate area, indicating that the incident occurred over a short period of time and at the same location. That same day, Islyn Nettles was transferred to Harlem Hospital in critical condition. Despite intensive care, she fell into a deep coma. After 5 days of treatment, her family agreed to discontinue life support measures on August 22, 2013. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office performed an autopsy shortly thereafter. The official autopsy report, released the following week, confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. The death was classified as a homicide. Although the report did not provide further details, the results from the medical examiner's office were the main basis for the police to redirect their investigation. In a case without any recorded images, every line from the forensic report becomes an important clue, not only to finding the person involved, but also to understanding what really happened in that brief moment in the middle of a summer night. The official investigation was launched immediately after the forensic report determined the cause of death and classified the incident as a criminal act. However, the process of solving the case did not proceed as quickly as expected. Although the victim was identified, the specific location and time were clear. The lack of surveillance camera images forced the police to rely almost entirely on witness accounts and peripheral details. In the early days, the police detained a suspect who was present at the scene at the time of the incident. However, after carefully checking the statement, time, and personal characteristics, this person was determined to have no direct involvement. This incident not only caused public confusion, but also put the investigation force under increasing pressure when the seemingly clear case fell into a deadlock. On August 20, 2013, just 3 days after the incident, a young man named James Dixon turned himself in at the 32nd Precinct in Harlem. However, for nearly 2 years, no formal charges were filed. Dixon turning himself in did not mean a full admission, and in the early stages, the police did not have enough legal grounds to file charges. This led to numerous memorials held by the victim's family and the LGBTQ+ community, putting pressure on the authorities to speed up the investigation. It was not until March 3, 2015, nearly 19 months after the incident, that the police officially issued an arrest warrant for James Dixon. Dixon was then 24 years old. He was charged with 3 counts: first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and first-degree assault. The arrest was made at Dixon's residence in Harlem, with the cooperation of the Interagency Investigation Team. One of the most important parts of the case is the video recording of Dixon's testimony, which lasted about an hour and 10 minutes. During the interrogation, James Dixon gave 2 statements with many inconsistent points. In the first statement, he said that his behavior was the result of an unspecified, spontaneous situation. However, in the second statement, after being questioned more deeply, he began to mention discriminatory details related to his personal reaction to a gender-conscious event. Dixon said that he and a group of friends approached 3 women in the area where the incident occurred. According to the statement, the conversation initially went normally, but when one of the friends realized something and started teasing, Dixon said he felt out of control and acted rashly. The interrogator repeatedly emphasized the inconsistencies in the statement, questioning whether anyone influenced or incited him to confess. Dixon denied the allegations and said he had only heard gossip from people in the neighborhood after the incident, which affected his interpretation of what had happened. Where the investigation took a sharp turn was when prosecutors assessed the value of the video testimony. Although there was no physical evidence of the crime scene, the interrogation room recording showed enough consistency to be considered a valid basis for a charge. Forensic experts analyzed the suspect's reaction to the testimony, which showed that there was an element of personal emotional trauma that led to his out-of-control behavior. Although not expressed directly in words, the long pauses, evasive answers, and constant changes in details highlighted the underlying content of the testimony, a defensive reaction to social prejudice and personal ego. After synthesizing the testimony, witnesses, forensic reports, and expert assessments, the case was completed and sent to the court for prosecution. On March 5, 2015, Dixon appeared in Manhattan District Court for his first hearing. Although he pleaded not guilty at the time, the videotaped testimony and psychological analysis began to be released, becoming the centerpiece of the entire case. The case had been slow going, but it was from the pivotal moments in the interrogation that the law enforcement agencies had a solid approach. Dixon's self-deception didn't make the case any simpler, but it was his telling of the story, not in denial but in confusion and uncertainty, that helped reveal what the physical evidence couldn't prove. There were no crime scene cameras, no visual witnesses, but the 70-minute videotape from the interrogation room, with its voices, eyes, and pauses, became the key piece of evidence that helped build the case. It is not just a confessional record, but also a psychological map, showing the breaks between personal perception and social reality, between what people want to believe and what happened. In March 2016, nearly 3 years after that fateful night in Harlem, the trial entered a pivotal phase. On March 17, at a press conference in court, James Dixon's attorney announced that he would not accept the 12-year prison deal that the prosecution had proposed, meaning that the defendant would appear in court for the full trial. Judge Robert Stahl stressed that if convicted after trial, the sentence could be as high as 25 years. The trial officially began in early April. On April 19, 2016, after a cross-examination and a report from the prosecution, James Dixon pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. This is the maximum sentence for manslaughter but not premeditated murder. The prosecutor asserted that, although there was no evidence of motive from the start, the act was still a serious crime because the knowledge that the victim was transgender could have contributed to the defendant's decisive reaction. The jury returned a final verdict. James Dixon was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Although the prosecutor had asked for a higher sentence of 17 years, the court stuck to 12 years after negotiations between the prosecution and the defendant. Outside the courtroom, sentiments were evident in simple but emotional words. Sky Nettles, Islin's sister, said in a choked voice, "12 years is not enough because he can go home. My sister can't go home, it's not fair." Those words echoed as a heartbreaking testament that, even if justice is achieved, the loss is irreparable. The public also watched the trial with anticipation. Some people reacted that the sentence was too light, not commensurate with the severity of the case. In addition, many LGBTQ+ activists affirmed that the trial was a step forward, albeit belated, showing that cases involving transgender people should also be taken seriously in the legal system. On August 22, 2013, Islin Nettles took her last breath after 5 days in hospital. Her family lost a daughter, her friends lost a companion, and her community lost a voice that was slowly taking shape in a world that is not easily accepting of differences. Islin's story ended not only with a verdict, but also left a void that time could not fill. Nearly 3 years later, in April 2016, the case closed with a 12-year sentence for the defendant. But the pain did not end with the trial. Those who loved Islin still go through each day with the memory of a young girl who dreamed of opening a fashion brand, who confidently lived her true self in a city that was sometimes still reserved about diversity. This case reminded not only a family, but also society, that the law needs to go further in protecting vulnerable communities, that humanity should not be limited by prejudice, and that vigilance is not just about others but sometimes about the silences that persist in society. The Islin Nettles case is legally closed, but the question remains, when will being true to yourself no longer be a trade-off?